All right, as she mentioned, I was fortunate to serve in the exalted position of Chief Curator of Natural History at the South Carolina State Museum, and I put exalted in quotes because my other job there was I was Director of Collections. I was not only responsible for all of natural history in South Carolina, but also all of the cultural history, the science, and the art and technology of the state. So I had a bunch of curators working for me, had something over 1 million items in the museum in the storage. In that respect, it was a great place to work. Fortunately for me, when I first got the job, 3 days after I started to work at the State Museum, we hosted the Myrtle Beach Fossil Club annual show. Myrtle Beach Fossil Club, I guess, doesn't even exist anymore. A woman named Ara Baker was responsible for that group, and it was a really active, really pushing group. And so we, as a way of putting the State Museum, which wasn't even open yet, out in front of the public, in addition to putting the Myrtle Beach Fossil Club out in front of the public, we invited their members to bring their fossils up to the State Museum and set up displays. And I grew up in Kansas. So in Kansas, I was a herpetologist. I came to the State Museum as a herpetologist. I study snakes. In Kansas, if you grow up in Kansas, you either watch the wheat grow, or you collect fossils, or you hunt snakes. There's not a whole lot else to do out there. So I spent a lot of time hunting snakes and collecting fossils. Wheat didn't interest me all that much. So I had a background in paleontology. And 3 days after I started at the State Museum, I'm walking through the exhibit hall of the Myrtle Beach Club show. And I'm going, my God, you find that here? No one knew. There are things buried in this state that people have not got a clue to yet. There are undescribed species out there. There are rare species out there. There are species out there that are dirt common here that are rare everywhere else. Paleontology in this state is an untapped gold mine. There are literally billions of shark teeth buried in the coastal plain of the state. And fortunately for us, we all live here and we're interested in it. It's easy to find a place to collect. You go down to Edisto Beach, safest place in the state to collect, and used to be at least, one of the better ones, but then everybody found out about it and that all changed because it got over-collected then. And now it's kind of hard to find things at Edisto Beach, but they're still there. And if you're looking for a Saturday afternoon, you want to hunt some shark teeth, that's a good, safe place to do it, because almost everywhere else that you collect shark teeth are posted, and there are insurance issues with the landowners. One of the best places to collect in the state was the giant cement plant at Harleyville. And everybody in the 80s and 90s went in and out of Giant like it was a swinging gate. Then they discovered they had an insurance issue. And the quarry right across the road south had a guy have a heart attack at his desk. He wasn't even in the quarry. And he died at his desk. And OSHA came in, the Occupation Safety and Health Administration came in and said, whoops, you had a death, we have to do a survey. And it ultimately cost that quarry $5 million to get out from underneath the OSHA regulations that they found problems with. Well, none of the other quarries were terribly interested in spending $5 million just so a couple of fossil hunters can go in and pick up bones, which is really unfortunate because every time somebody digs a hole in this state, we get a window into the past and the opportunity to see something that we've maybe never seen before. The Mark Clark Pit in Charleston is a classic example. Giant cement is a great example. As these holes are dug and people go in and look around legally, that's the key, legally, your opportunity to acquire things that maybe nobody's ever seen before are certainly a possibility. We've picked up any number of new species that were previously unrecognized out of construction sites and cement quarries, although it's much harder to do now. The first paleontologists in this state, sadly, are not sitting in this room. There are fossils in museums that were clearly picked up on archaeological sites and were altered to be tools. So really the first paleontologists in South Carolina were the Native Americans. There's a megalodon tooth in the upstate in a little museum that has been reworked so that the root is broken off except for a squared piece in the middle, and that was used to haft it to a stick, and it was probably used as a hoe to dig dirt. So clearly these folks were aware of stuff and utilizing stuff that everybody's after today, but boy, did they set the stage first. So okay, fast forward to the, say to the 1820s, 1830s. At that time, there were three great centers of learning in the Western Hemisphere. It was Boston and Harvard University, the Academy of Natural Sciences at Philadelphia, and the Charleston Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. It's one of the most significant, important historical collections in existence, and it's the oldest museum in the Western Hemisphere. So it had support from people like Louis Agassiz, who was the founder and director of the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard. Agassiz used to come down to Charleston. He was a racist. He would measure people's heads and make all kinds of bizarre predictions. But as a biologist, he was pretty good. And as a paleontologist, he was exceptional. He was the guy who came up with the concept of glaciation. I don't know if anybody's aware of that. Nobody ever really thought about ice sheets in the mountains and what they would do to things. So it was Agassiz in Switzerland in the 1830s and 40s looking at those mountains who came up with that hypothesis that glaciers cause the round bottom valleys and streams cause the V-bottom valleys. So that, as an example, that's one of the things that he came up with. We have a guy named Gibbs in our background. Gibbs was a doctor in Columbia, and in fact was the mayor of Columbia the day that it fell to the Union troops when those dreadful Yankees showed up. And he was a profoundly gifted paleontologist. And fortunately for him, he had a cousin named Myrick who owned a plantation down on the lower coastal plain and who had his slaves dig ditches to drain ground. So when they dug the ditches, they found bones of a kind that Myrick certainly didn't recognize. He showed them to Gibbs, his cousin. Gibbs recognized him because he'd been studying papers written at the Natural History Museum in London by a guy named Richard Owen, who was at the time the preeminent paleontologist of the planet. And Gibbs looked at these fossils and realized that they were what Owen was calling a whale, but they were fundamentally different from the other whales that anybody knew about. And so now we call them the Archaeoceti, the ancient ones. And Gibbs described his and published it. And Owen said, no, it's not what it is. It's a baby of one of mine. And Gibbs wisely said, okay, and let it go at that until the day after Richard Owen died. And then he published a retraction. So nowadays we recognize Gibbs' fossil. Another of the events that happened down in the Charleston area had to do with phosphate mining. Phosphate is important in agricultural purposes, and so there was a huge mining effort going on just inland from the city of Charleston. And interestingly enough, they were digging up fossils from the Ice Age, from the Pleistocene. They were finding mammoth teeth. And none of the landowners knew what they were, but the slaves did. They recognized the teeth as similar to teeth that they had seen back home in Africa. So between the Native Americans and slaves, we have a lot to learn. We need to pay attention to that a little bit more. Now, there are Several notable collections of fossils in South Carolina. I'm pretty fond of talking about the State Museum, but I may be slightly biased. The Charleston Museum, certainly, historically and for the materials that they store there, and the College of Charleston, which is a much newer facility, certainly have immense holdings of local stuff. The State Museum, I mentioned the Academy of Natural Sciences and the Museum of Comparative Zoology. They have collections from South Carolina. And the Florida Museum of Natural History has collections from South Carolina that I put there because my immediate supervisor, when I was first hired, wanted to put unstudied fossil turtles in the hands of 8-year-old children in nature space. And the only way I could save what collection we had was to break it up among the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, the Florida Museum of Natural History in Gainesville, and we kept a third of it. So part of it is at the State Museum. Most of it, sadly, is not. It was a curious time at the State Museum that way. So why are all these fossils here? What is there about this place that causes so much to be here? If you look in the subsurface between the area of the North Carolina-South Carolina state line and the Georgia-South Carolina state line on the Savannah River, you notice there's this great huge arc that forms, it runs clear inland to Columbia. That whole area is called the Charleston Embayment. And because the oceans have come and gone and the land surfaces have risen and fallen any number of times over the past, well, at least 65 million years, the ocean came in, eroded, deposited. Animals that were living in the ocean died in what is now dry land. And during the height of the Ice Age, during the last glaciation called the Wisconsin Ice Sheet, about 19 or 20,000 years ago, there was so much water tied up in ice that the ocean levels dropped 120 plus or minus meters. That's almost 500 feet. So South Carolina once upon a time was not only a very different place than what it is today, animal-wise and plant-wise, it was also a lot bigger. We have at the State Museum a collection of which I am particularly proud. When I first went to work there, we didn't have a whole lot. A lot of you, I'm sure, remember a fellow named Rudy Mankey. Rudy was the nature scene guy for ETV and had a show for years and years and years. Rudy was the first curator of natural history at the State Museum. Then came my boss, who wanted to put turtles in the hands of 8-year-olds, and then me. And so when I got the position and really had the opportunity, I started collecting my brains out because there's so much buried in this state that's worth having. And so as sites would appear, I would go out and camp on site. I spent 3 weeks in the back of giant cement, sleeping on a folding table inside a little tin tool shed with a bunch of mice. I really figured I was going to have hantavirus before it was over with. So I finally set 4 mouse traps and killed 4 mice in the first minute and a half that they were set. It was a busy place. But what I had there was I was camped on top of one of the richest Pleistocene fossil sites that has ever been found on the east coast of the United States. We took remains of 6 saber-toothed cats out of it, including 2 complete skulls and 4 brain cases. We got camels of 2 different genera. We got horses. We got all sorts of unimaginable things, including undescribed tortoises. We have an undescribed tortoise in that collection. So it's one of those situations where you have to really prepare yourself for this because, one, you're digging all day, but at night, Giant Cement was worried about my safety because, quite frankly, the value of a saber cat skull from South Carolina is probably at the time about $15,000. And the word was out on the hobby community that we were finding this stuff in there. So Giant Cement asked me to arm myself. I carried a handgun back there. And I set an ambush one night, didn't shoot anybody, don't worry. I set an ambush one night. We had our campsite, and I set up a fire and had it soaked in gasoline so it would light very quickly. And then I got in my truck, drove away. Parked my truck about a half or 3/4 of a mile away, and then snuck back to my campsite and waited. And sure enough, an hour and a half or so after I pulled my truck out, here comes flashlights through the trees. It's people who are going to come on to the State Museum fossil site, which has been placed off limits to everybody except the State Museum by the landowners, Giant Cement. And so I let them get maybe 150 or 200 yards away, and I lit a match and lit the campfire. And I got called names that night that I hadn't heard since I was in basic training. They were falling over each other. They were falling off little cliffs. They were trying to get out of the pit and get away because they thought nobody was there and they were going to come in and high grade the site. And they did it on several occasions, sadly enough. The site was found by a hobby collector, which is typical for the vast majority of the important fossils that are found in South Carolina, because hobby collectors are the ones who will take the time and spend the money to go out and actually do the physical work of looking. As a museum curator and director of collections, I spent more time in meetings than I did in the field. And so that was, as far as I was concerned, that was a waste, but the museum staff didn't think so, so I was stuck with it. So I relied on hobby collectors, and Frank Morning, who spoke earlier today, is one of them. He's a Florence fella, Fossil Frank as he is known. And he and a couple of his buddies introduced me to the Cretaceous of Florence area, and it's a rich place. There's a lot of stuff up there from the age of dinosaurs. The first dinosaur teeth, the first dinosaur remains from South Carolina were 3 little tiny hadrosaurian dinosaur teeth about 5 millimeters long. They were worn out shed teeth. I showed them to a paleontologist named Jack Horner, who was he was the technical staff for Jurassic Park. Jack knows dinosaurs. And he said, oh yeah, hadrosaurian dinosaurs. And so, all right, we have dinosaurs in the state of South Carolina. So we decided we're going to hold a press conference. And so we have, I don't know, 10 or 15 TV stations, newspapers in the Pleistocene Hall on the natural history floor of the State Museum. And I hold up these little tiny teeth, which are almost imperceptibly small. I don't know what people were expecting, but I think they were looking for something bigger. And I said, you newspaper folks have the golden opportunity. You can get it right. Archaeologists collect arrowheads. They study Native American things. Paleontologists study bones. They go out and dig up dinosaurs and camels and horses and all that kind of stuff. And so as I'm announcing the presence of these dinosaur teeth in South Carolina, the very next day, blasted across the top of the front page of the state newspaper, archaeologists report dinosaurs in South Carolina for the first time. My frustration reigned supreme. So you have issues. You have situations where you can get terribly frustrated with the press or with your hierarchy or whoever. But then when you get out in the field and you realize what's buried out there and you have the opportunity to listen to volunteers complain because there are so many bones buried in front of them. That was unique in my experience. I had never seen that before. But one of my good buddies down in Somerville said, oh man, there's too much here. Look at this is laying over the top of this one, this one. This site where we got the saber-toothed cats, 4,000 or 5,000 bones came out of an area about 10 feet wide, about 1 meter deep, and about 100 or 150 feet long. It was a channel, and it was found by a hobby collector. A hobby collector was walking one end, and here was a bone sticking out, a nice brown, very pristine bone. He dug it out and went, oh my gosh. So I started trying to get the State Museum in there just to make a collection for the state. And we were told, no, it's been destroyed now, it's gone. Then one day a kid showed up at the State Museum with a beer flat filled with brown bones from this site. I said, when did you get these? He said, yesterday. I said, uh-huh. So I got on the phone, called the powers that be at the giant cement plant, and they told me, no, that site's destroyed. That's what we were told. And they never bothered to go back and look because it's clear in the back, against the back wall. So I said, well, I'm looking at a box of stuff right now that was collected yesterday. And the general manager at Giant, it was quiet on the other end of the phone for a few seconds. He says, can you meet me? I said, I'll be there in 2 hours. And then I called my buddy down in Somerville who was fussing about all the bones. And we met him out there, we drove back there, and what the hobby collectors had done, and I should probably preface this with, there are two basic types of hobby collectors. There are those who collect for the joy and the science of it. They understand that there is a redeeming value to these fossils beyond a dollar bill. The other hobby collectors spend an inordinate amount of time pulling megalodon teeth off the bottoms of rivers or sneaking on to my fossil site at Giant Cement and stealing the stuff and then selling it. Well, what these hobby collectors had done was they had told Giant Cement that the site was destroyed. And then we proved to them that it wasn't because we were back there looking at it. And what they had done, they had undercut a bank about 8 feet high that was drying clay. They had undercut it about that much, about that high, because there was one layer in there that had a lot of bones in it. And that was as far as they could reach. But it created the worst safety situation imaginable in that drying clay bank at one point was going to slump and fall forward, and if there was somebody under it, they were going to be buried alive and they were going to die. And Giant Cement was going to be shut down forever because somebody died back there, and the ramifications were endless. So that brings us to the issue of how to separate between these two types of hobby collectors. Within those who do it for the science or for the sheer joy of it, there's a situation that I refer to as the obsession of possession. They've got something. They've got something nobody else has got. And nobody else is probably going to get it. And they're going to hang on to it till they die. Sadly, a lot of those could be covered by Indiana Jones' statement in one of the early movies about that belongs in a museum. Fortunately for us, Giant Cement recognized that the Camelot fauna in the back of their quarry belonged in a museum, and that's the reason we have 13 sliding drawer cabinets of fossils up at the State Museum from that one site. It's the reason we have an insight into a time period that we had never gotten in the state of South Carolina before. It's called the late Irvingtonian. It was in between the ice sheets, and it was a time period that had simply not been recognized. Now, the modern day Pleistocene, the ice ages, are now deemed to cover 2.55 or 56 million years. They've pushed the backside of it farther back in time. It used to be 1.8 million years. But now it's the Blancan land mammal age, the Irvingtonian land mammal age, and the Rancho La Brean land mammal age. And so we have these three discrete time periods available in the state because now the State Museum has faunas from all three time periods. So we can begin to look at those fossils and say something about the effects of taxonomic change through time. What mammals were here 2.5 million years ago that weren't here 1.8 million years ago, which weren't here 300,000 years ago. You can look at a change in the fauna. And that will indicate to you changes in the habitat, because a lot of the species that are in there are still alive today, so we know something about their ecology. The farther back you go, back in the Blancan, that doesn't happen so much. It's a little bit too old. But the Rancho La Brean, there's stuff in there that's alive here in South Carolina today. And there's stuff in there that's not. And fortunately, saber cats are one of them. The others are ground sloths that were 7 or 8 feet tall. 2 different kinds of camels. And when I say camels, think lamelline camels like you see in South America with llamas, alpacas, and vicuñas, because those are camels. And we had something very similar to that up here. In fact, the genus name of one of them is Paleo llama, the oldest llama. So we had those. We had horses went extinct in North America about 8 or 10,000 years ago, and weren't here before or after that until they were introduced by the Spaniards when they came over to inhabit the New World. And the horses got away from them. And all of the horses, or at least the wild ones, that are available out west today are remnants of some of those early horses that got away. And Comanche Indians became the finest light cavalry in the world because of their ability to deal with those horses. The Comanche, I'm from Oklahoma. I was born in Oklahoma, so Comanches are a pretty prominent part of my upbringing. And those are folks that were somebody special. They knew how to do things. But they didn't have to deal with a lot of this stuff. All they had to deal with were bison and Caucasians. And sadly, they lost. Both of them did, the Comanches and the bison. So we come to this obsession of possession again. There are things that you will find if you go out and look that are supremely important. I just looked at a hadrosaurian dinosaur tooth upstairs in one of the exhibits. That's one of those Indiana Jones things, belongs in a museum. There's only a couple of them known from South Carolina, and this one is far and away the biggest and the best. So there's a lot of information tied up in that one little tooth that can be gleaned by someone who knows what they're looking for, which, by the way, is not me, because dinosaurs, quite frankly, bore me to tears. But the last 65 million years, well, that's a little different. Anything after the dinosaurs is just fine, especially if it's a snake. Snakes are my specialty. So with that, I will ask, are there any questions?